Hi guys and girls, so today I'm going to be looking at Unit 4 Psychology for mental health. So mental health is measured on a continuum. You can't be, depressed all the time, right? You might have periods of time where you are depressed, or that you're having periods of time where you're mentally healthy or you have a mental health problem, right? And there'll be different people who have similar diagnosis that have different times where they might feel good or bad, and it's different for different people. So internal factors that affect mental health are ones that originate within a person. So it's your genetics, your beliefs, attitudes, your ability to deal, and the way you think. The external factors are factors which originate outside the person. So that could include your social relationships, the amount of people that can support you, the level of education, your housing, your income. They're the ones that tend to affect you. So characteristics of a mentally healthy person tends to fall along high levels of functioning, social and emotional well-being, and resilience. So high level of functioning is how well you actually operate in your environment. Can you meet the demands of everyday life? Can you deal with things that pop up? So people who are mentally healthy tend to have high level of functioning, while people who don't tend to have a low level of functioning. So if you have a high level of functioning, you have successful relationships, you're productive, you can live by yourself, you can cook, clean, wash, whatever. You have reasonable cognitive skills, so you can make your own decisions, you can solve problems, you can communicate any issues, and you can control your emotions. If you have low levels of functioning, then you have the opposite of what's mentioned above. High levels of social and emotional well-being. If you're mentally healthy, you're more likely to have higher levels of social and emotional well-being. So people who have high levels of social well-being more likely have healthy relationships with friends and family, interact with others appropriately, feel self-confident, and resolve conflicts with others. For people with emotional well-being, you're more likely to have an understanding and be aware of your own emotions. You can control your emotions and express them suitably, and you're able to identify the emotions of others, and you're generally a positive person with a positive attitude. You also tend to have high resilience. So people who are mentally healthy are generally pretty resilient. This means they're able to cope with and bounce back from stresses. So COVID would be a stressor. And if you can bounce back from being in lockdown for a long time, then you have high resilience. So people who are mentally healthy and generally have a high level of resilience may perceive a stressor as a challenge or an opportunity, whereas people with low levels of resilience may feel overwhelmed by the stressor. So you may not be able to cope. People who are mentally healthy will go, well, yes, we're in lockdown, but that means I can do, other things other than just schoolwork. Resilient people tend to have a strong belief in their abilities, so you have high self-efficacy, high self-esteem, and are able to solve problems effectively. In regards to mental health, if you're going to do an experiment with mental health, there are two ethical implications that you need to be worried about. That is informed consent and placebos. So if you're after informed consent, right, every single experiment you do, you must have informed consent. The problem is that if you have a mental health disorder, there's a good chance that you may not be able to give consent or understand the proposed research and the risk involved. Mainly because your mental health problem or your mental disorder is actually preventing you from understanding or being able to give a sound consent. When it comes to placebos, this is actually problematic. A placebo is a treatment that has no actual effect. It just looks the same as the treatment. They're usually used in a control group, and they test the effectiveness of the real treatment, so you have something to compare it to. The problem with using a placebo with someone with a mental health disorder is essentially you're denying them some sort of treatment for their disorder, which means that they may remain unwell and they may suffer, and it may actually have dire consequences. For example, let's say we're testing depression medication and one group is getting antidepressants and the other group is getting nothing. There is a good chance that the people that are getting nothing may become more depressed, which could lead to suicidal ideations, and it could get very, very messy. So it's important for researchers to consider this before administering a placebo, and don't administer a placebo if there is a known risk of significant harm in the absence of the treatment. And this is one that comes up quite a lot in experiments. Mental health disorders, you need to actually look at the 4P factor model, and I've done so many videos on this already, so I'm not going to go into a lot of details. Predisposing risk factors is the first one. These are the ones that increase susceptibility, so that's the word that you need to look for. Another word that you might be able to use is vulnerability, but VCAR do like susceptibility. So, in other words, something that you already have or that your family has that's passed it down to you. Precipitating risk factors increase susceptibility and contribute to the occurrence of a particular mental disorder. So they occur just before the onset of a mental health disorder, for example, poor sleep, drug use, breakup, diagnosis of a terminal illness. So let's say, for example, we're going to go with depression here. You have a family member who has depression, so that's predisposing. Precipitating risk factors, so it increases. It could be that you've recently broken up with your girlfriend/boyfriend, whatever floats your boat, and that would contribute to you getting a mental disorder. Doesn't mean you've got it yet, it just may contribute to it. Perpetuating risk factors maintain the occurrence of a particular mental health disorder, and it inhibits recovery from the disorder. So this could be a poor response to medication, lack of access to treatment, or poor social support. So precipitating is what's going to contribute to it. Perpetuating is going to maintain it, and we need to make sure that we have those covered. Protective factors are the ones that reduce the likelihood of the occurrence of the mental disorder, and this could be adequate sleep, healthy diet, strong social support, whatever. So the 4P factor model is usually used in conjunction with the biopsychosocial model. So the biopsychosocial model is a way of describing how biological, social, and psychological factors all combine to influence a person's mental health. All three types of factors are equally important. Usually they call this holistically, right? Mental health is viewed holistically. It's not just biological that could lead to a mental disorder, it's all three. So all three factors are equally important. Generic vulnerability means that you have a family member who has the disorder, which means that you may genetically inherit it. This is very true with depression and schizophrenia. You may have a poor response to medication, which means that you have little to no effect on medication doesn't actually help you in any way, shape, or form. And this could be due to your genetics and how it's processed in the body. It could be your age, gender, weight, and these all could actually affect the way you respond to medication. Poor sleep, having terrible sleep can actually affect your mood, right? And it can have what's known as a bidirectional relationship. And what that means is that if a mental disorder causes poor sleep can then make your mental disorder worse. And it just, one could cause the other and the other could cause the other. It really is a circle. As we looked earlier, sleep deprivation can have a number of effects that can reduce the levels of functioning and well-being. Substance use or substance abuse refers to legal or illegal drugs, and you pretty much know all of them. And it can actually occur before the mental disorder or actually contribute to the mental disorder. And if you do take some drugs, it can actually increase the chances of you getting a mental disorder, especially with schizophrenia. Taking drugs beforehand can actually increase your likelihood of getting it. Psychological risk factors could be rumination, and that means your thinking of the things, pretty much the negative side to things or undesirable things and feelings without taking any actions to change them. So you're just thinking about the consequences and the causes of a negative situation, but you don't do anything to change it, right? So you're just thinking about all the bad things, but you're not actually doing anything to go, I'm having an issue with this and I'm thinking really bad things, and you just don't do anything about it. You just keep thinking about it. And this is a big issue with depression because it starts to overwhelm you because you're only thinking about the negative and you're stuck in this whole idea of, I've done something wrong or this is wrong and I can't get out of it. If you don't talk with someone about it and don't get it off your chest, there is a good chance that it'll just ruminate and get worse. Impaired reasoning and memory, it pretty much can contribute to the development and progression of a mental disorder. If you're reasoning, it means that you're actually trying to solve the problem. However, if you've got impaired reasoning, right, you start to have delusions and you jump to conclusions. And this will be like if a teacher says, I'd like to see you after class. All of you go, oh my God, what have I done wrong? What have I done wrong? But it could be you've done something good. But because you're thinking about it, you're jumping to the worst conclusions. Also, impaired memory tends to refer to problems with short-term and long-term memory. You might have issues with your memory, so you're only thinking about the worst-case scenarios. You're only thinking about all the bad times. But it could also be literally that your memory has issues, right? And you're not piecing together everything. Stress, of course, is going to lead to a mental disorder, especially if it becomes too overwhelming. And it can play an important role in the development of schizophrenia, and it can cause or contribute to a mental disorder depending on how you cope with that stress and the resources that you have available. If you're not willing to talk to someone, there's a good chance that stress will overwhelm you and it just becomes a never-ending cycle of, depression and despair. So stress can have a negative impact on both physical and mental health. Poor self-efficacy is another one, and efficacy, if you can remember, is all about your belief in your abilities. And it's your belief that you can perform specific behaviours you need to succeed, right? If you want to succeed in the art world, there's no point talking about, your artwork if you don't actually do any of your art. People with high levels of self-efficacy tend to take on challenges, show greater persistence, and are more likely to succeed. If you have low levels of self-efficacy, you're less likely to succeed and you're going to experience more anxiety, depression, and stress. All right, social risk factors originate in the external environment. So the other two, so biological and psychological, are within, they're internal factors. Social factors are the only external factors. So disorganized attachment refers to the emotional bond which forms between an infant and your primary caregiver. Disorganized attachment is a type of attachment that is characterized by inconsistent behavior when with a primary caregiver. This can include pulling away from the caregiver, avoiding eye contact, or other odd behaviors such as freezing or rocking back and forth. Disorganized attachment can occur due to things such as abuse or hostile care, but can also occur when these things aren't present and the family appears normal. This can result in anxiety and inner turmoil and decreased emotional control and lower levels of resilience. And this can lead into later years of your life. You can also have a loss of significant relationship, and you may experience grief, sadness, stress, anxiety, and guilt. The grief will usually resolve over time. It still exists, but you tend to be able to cope with it over time. And it can have a major impact on mental health. So it is a risk factor for the development of depression or substance abuse in particular. Lastly, the role of stigma as a barrier for accessing treatment. A lot of people avoid getting help they need with mental health due to stigma, right? They feel shame or disapproval because they've got a mental illness. And mental disorders are usually stigmatized by society, mainly because of movies and popular media, but still. And therefore, people may not seek treatment for their mental disorder because they fear being judged or embarrassed by society. And this can actually increase the onset of the or progression of a mental disorder and make recovery more difficult because you're just not getting the help that you need. Usually it affects young people, and usually it affects males. Cumulative risk is another one, and this is that whole idea that biological, psychological, and social risk factors, and I did a video on this as well, right? You might have one or two of these, and then all of a sudden something else comes on. So you might have a genetic predisposition to depression, and then all of a sudden, right, you're unable to cope with the stresses of VCE, and then all of a sudden COVID happens, then lockdown happens, and then you lost a family member, and these are all just being piled up and piled up and piled up on top of you to the point where you can no longer cope. And this is cumulative risk. It means the more risk factors you have, the greater the chances that you are going to have a mental disorder. Right, so this is pretty much the 4P factor model. Once again, I've done this a couple of times now, so just have a look at the other videos. And this is pretty much how that the table works out. I've gone through it all. Make sure you know the difference between the mental health 4P factor model and the phobia 4P factor model. They are two different models. It is new for this study design. I would recommend going over this 1,000 times, break it down, create a summary sheet, do what you need to do. Cumulative risk, multiple factors equals significant risk. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask, and good luck.